Negotiations with the President of the United States, Donald Trump, took place in a frank and business-like atmosphere. I think we can call it a success and a very fruitful round of negotiations.
Politicians and candidates are weighing in on President Donald Trump's most recent meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Among them is Virginia U.S. Senator Mark Warner.
Well, my head is reeling. I was meeting today with Senator Marco Rubio, one of my Republican colleagues on the Intelligence Committee, with parliamentarians from European nations and Canada who had also been victims of Russian interference in their elections. And the fact that we were all sitting as allies and parts of the European Union and looking at these images of Donald Trump basically in this very weak performance with Vladimir Putin kowtow to the Russian president and dismiss the absolute unanimous consensus of the American intelligence community about Russian intervention, you had looks that were, there was a lot of shaking of heads of countries who have been our allies for literally decades.
Thank you. Question for each president. President Trump, yes. you first. Just now, President Putin denied having anything to do with the election interference in 2016. Every U.S. intelligence agency has concluded that Russia did. My first question for you, sir, is who do you believe? My second question is, would you now, with the whole world watching, tell President Putin, would you denounce what happened in 2016, and would you warn him to never do it again?
So let me just say that we have two thoughts. You have groups that are wondering why the FBI never took the server. Why haven't they taken the server? Why was the FBI told to leave the office of the Democratic National Committee?
Senator Warner says he wants to know more about what went on in the meeting, including
the translators had any notes of what went on. As we know from Mr. Trump's previous meeting, and listen, I applauded the fact that he was willing to try to reach out to the North Korea leader, but then he had this one-off meeting with the North Korea leader. He then tweeted after that meeting that Americans in the world could rest peacefully because North Korea will no longer be a nuclear state. That was a month or so ago, and we've seen no progress on that front from our intelligence community, and obviously the follow-up meetings have been a disaster. So taking Mr. Trump at his view of what happens in a private one-on-one meeting is not something that gives me a lot of confidence. I'd like to hear from the translators, and I'd like to hear from other members of the Trump administration about what really went on.
According to the senator, President Trump has gone over the line.
A lot of my Republican colleagues who've been saying, don't worry, Mark, when he goes over the line, they'll be there. And to me, this is that moment. He's gone over the line, has not made our country safer by his actions with not only Putin, but his actions in terms of dealing with our NATO allies over the last week. What I worry about is if Congress doesn't send some sense of the Senate or take some action, do we in a sense signal to the rest of the world that the performance of Mr. Trump today reflected American values or reflected American foreign policy, where we were going to, in a sense, kowtow to Russia? I think that would be a very wrong message, particularly after the disastrous week in terms of the meetings with NATO.
That he would stand next to Vladimir Putin and take his side over patriotic Americans who are working in our national security establishment, who have unanimously concluded that Russia attacked our 2016 election. And for him to say, well, my people say they did, but he says they didn't. I can't see why Russia would. What an abomination that all the hardworking Americans with agencies like the CIA and the FBI and other national security agencies who've reached a consensus opinion that Russia cyber-attacked the integrity of our elections, to watch this president stand on the stage publicly and say he believes Vladimir Putin over patriotic Americans who are doing this work was a new low.
On July 11th, King gave an interview where he suggested the outcome of the Russian investigation could be detrimental to the U.S.
The investigation, it's not, nothing is proven yet, but we're now beyond obstruction of justice in terms of what's being investigated. This is moving into perjury, false statements, and even into potentially treason.
Just days later, on July 13th, 12 Russian intelligence officers were indicted for their role in the hacking of the Democratic National Committee and the Clinton presidential campaign, 3 days before Trump met with Putin in Helsinki, Finland. I reached out to both 6th District congressional candidates Jennifer Lewis, and Ben Klein for their response to the meeting. Lewis issued this statement, and I quote, "I'm not sure why President Trump agreed to meet privately with a corrupt autocrat who persecutes journalists and the LGBTQ community. The press conference was a catastrophe, and I'm afraid our president is being manipulated. By siding with Putin over our own intelligence agencies, the president insults and demeans the very people who put their lives on the line for our national security." End of quote. Klein did not respond to Breaking Through's calls.
Hey everybody, it's Corey Stewart, Republican candidate for the United States Senate here in Virginia.
Stewart gave his stance on Presidents Trump and Putin's meeting.
But the fact remains is, it would not have been the right thing to go over to Helsinki, meet with one of the critical, the leaders of one of the most critical countries in the world, and then blow the whole thing up over these allegations over this Russia meddling in our elections. That would not have been good for the United States.
Elaine Rackley for Breaking Through News.